Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very senior and accomplished professional from Nashville, Tennessee, USA, Dr. JJ Peterson. JJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Peterson is the head of StoryBrand. He has spent the last 20 years practicing and teaching communication theory. So JJ, before I start talking to you about StoryBrand, tell me a little bit about your own journey in brief.
Yes, I've had a wild journey. It's kind of funny when anybody asks me about my past. I've been in education for a long time. So I was a college professor and dean of students.
Wow.
I also worked in the entertainment industry. So I worked in television and film and actually toured and did improv comedy for a number of years. Wow. I was a youth pastor. So I worked at a church. I have worked for international nonprofits doing community development all over the world. And so, it's at one point I was living in the slums of Tijuana. And then in one point I was on television. And
wow, what an amazingly diverse journey. And that must have given you so much wonderful experience, isn't it?
It really did. And I realized through all of it, a lot of times I think you don't realize where things were taking you until later. But for me, even though it was kind of all over the place, it always had to do with telling stories, whether it was working for a nonprofit and trying to figure out how to tell the stories of the people that we had been working with and tell the stories of the people who would come and work with us, or teaching. I taught communication and marketing, or whether it was in Hollywood, no matter what, it was always about story. It was about inviting people into a beautiful story that ultimately changed them, through the process. So, but it's one of those things where when you're in it, it's kind of, well, I'm all over the place. I'm jumping from here to here. And then you get later and it's like, oh, there's the thread. There is the thread that kind of stuck through everything.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So, JJ, now let's move to StoryBrand. Unusual name, but tell me a little bit about the venture and what was your motivation to start it?
So for us, so many companies are so close to their products and service that they have a hard time explaining what it is that they offer.
Correct.
And story is such a big buzzword in marketing right now, but really people are telling the wrong story. They're actually telling the wrong story and it's hurting them. And what we do at StoryBrand is we teach companies that when you're telling your story in marketing, what you should be doing is not actually telling your story. You should be telling your customer's story.
Correct.
You should position your customer as the hero of the story and you as the guide. And it's a paradigm shift for a lot of companies to say, we're not the focus of the story. And so that's really why we started it, is we saw ourselves doing it. We had a conference company at the time, and we saw ourselves really trying to say, it's a great conference. You should come to this conference. It's amazing. We're great. Look at all the amazing speakers. And it did well, but it just wasn't growing the way we hoped. It kind of stayed year over year over year, the same level. And once we realized we were trying to make ourselves the hero and really our customers needed to be the hero, changed our marketing to do that, our numbers started growing exponentially. We started selling out every conference. And so we decided to help other companies experience this same growth as well.
Fascinating. So let me start with a very basic question to the communication guru I have with me today. Why is effective communication so important for everyone?
Well, that is a big question. It really comes down to inspiring and motivating people, right? If there's a relational aspect to communication of just how do you build relationship and work through that. But when it comes to brands and telling stories for brands and companies and or politicians or anybody really, if you want to motivate
Mhm.
anybody to action, even if you go all the way back to Aristotle and Plato in
Mhm.
Poetics, they would argue the best way to do it is through story.
Correct.
That if you want to move people, if you want to change their hearts, if you want to change their minds, if you want to change their actions,
Mm.
the best way to do it is through story. And in order to tell a good story, you need to be a good communicator.
Right.
Now, I think the mistake a lot of people make is they think, oh, I need to be a good storyteller in the sense of I need to be entertaining.
Mm.
And so they think, well, I'm not a good storyteller because I need to be rah rah and I need to be on a stage and be
Absolutely.
hilarious.
Mm.
And the reality is, story is not about being entertaining.
Mm.
Story is actually based in a formula. When you talk about stories, all stories are really based in a formula.
Mm.
And in order to communicate more clearly, when you understand how story works,
Mm.
what the formula is, you become a better communicator, period.
Mm.
And so it's not about being entertaining. It's not about making people cry or
Mm.
using emotion, which can be a piece of it.
Mm.
But it really comes down to understanding that story is formulaic. And when you understand the formula of story,
Mm.
then you tap into how the human brain works and you
Correct.
actually can motivate people to action.
Mm.
And Aristotle and Plato even go into how to do that through comedy specifically, or how to do that through drama. It's all very interesting, but really what we're ultimately trying to do by being a good communicator is move people to action.
Amazing. And based on, 20 years of practicing and teaching communication, what would you say are some of the key challenges a lot of us face in communication and public speaking? And do share some examples without names.
Yeah, without names. Well, I can use my name. I'll use my name.
Okay.
I think truthfully, the biggest insecurity that a lot of people feel, well, the biggest challenge that a lot of people feel in communication is insecurity, right? It's insecurity.
Mm.
When we get up on stage or we start talking to somebody, our own insecurity starts to well up inside of us.
Mm.
And what happens when that happens
Mm.
is we actually then try to puff up ourselves more. We
Mm.
try to be more aggressive. We try to, be more impressive or entertaining. And in reality, being impressive and entertaining and aggressive can sometimes, not always, but
Yeah.
can sometimes get in the way of communication.
Mm.
And that's like, if you think about it, and this is why when I talk about you as a brand or as a communicator, you want to position yourself as a guide in the story and your customers or your audience as the hero, is this. So if you think about heroes in a movie, heroes are actually insecure and ill-equipped through almost the entire movie, right?
Correct.
They're up and down, right? They get the girl, then they lose the girl, and then they jump out of a window and escape everything, and then all of a sudden they get arrogant and they are caught again. It's up and down. So heroes are actually weak. The strongest character in any story is the guide. So the guide is the person who's helping the hero win, and they are just consistent. They don't change. If you think of very famous movies of like Star Wars, Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi are the guides, and they're the strongest character. Luke Skywalker is up and down. In Lord of the Rings, Gandalf is the strongest character. Frodo is up and down. So the main character of a story, the hero of a story, is actually the weak one. And what happens is when we get up on stage or we're trying to communicate an idea and we start feeling insecure, what we want to do is make ourselves the hero. So we start bragging about how good we are, or we try to be entertaining at the expense of being clear in communication, or we try to be impressive because and when we do that, what we're actually doing is showing our vulnerabilities and we're showing our weakness. So I think that's the thing, is that everybody, and any communicator needs to understand this, everybody's insecure. I've been teaching and doing this and performing for 20 years, and I get nervous every single time I walk on stage still.
I agree.
And when I give into that insecurity and I try to puff myself up, that's when I start making the mistakes as a communicator. And so I think for a lot of communicators, if you just say, I get it, I feel overwhelmed with this. I feel insecure. I'm a little shaky, but don't let your insecurity show. Become the guide and stay the guide in your talk, in your marketing. Because when you do that, you're actually the strongest character in the story. And when you try to make yourself the hero, you're actually positioning yourself as weak.
Very well said. And therefore, what I'm hearing you say, that good communicators can be trained. They are not born communicators.
No, I think there's people who have some natural, natural stage presence and natural entertaining side of things. But every single person out there can be trained to be a good communicator for sure.
Very interesting. JJ, now let's move to another area of your specialization, which is on how you tell your corporate customers to focus on the consumer, then the brand, and then on the company.
Yeah.
The communication landscape is changing dramatically, with technology. Everything seems to be moving to handheld devices. Based on your experience, how have you seen communication evolve from the big movie screen where you have worked to the television, now to handheld devices?
It's that's a really interesting question to me, because, when I'm studying communication, much of my study is really in theory and in storytelling. And what I've seen is in reality, the stuff that is working has not changed a lot. That's where I would say, the foundational pieces of things that really are working from a marketing perspective in particular, they're not changing a lot. They're simple, they're clear, and they position the customer as the hero. We are living these days in a very disconnected society where people are, they are looking at their phones a lot, and they're feeling frustrated at that disconnection from each other and from brands. They feel used, they feel overwhelmed by all the information. And I think forever, the companies and the people who really communicate clearly and position their customer as the hero or their audience as the hero are the ones who've always won. And I think that's going to be more and more needed as we move forward. Depending on the research you read, people are receiving between 3,000 and 5,000 commercial messages a day. Right. So 3,000 to 5,000, and we have it in our phone and everywhere we look, it's on television, it's on our computer, 3,000 to 5,000. So the only messages that are actually going to get through are the ones that are clear and the ones that position their customer as the hero. And when I keep using that phrase, position your customer as the hero, which feels very, out there. But let me just give a couple things that really do that for people. People are looking, we're always scanning our environment for information that helps us survive and thrive. Our brains are developed this way, and we actually are designed to tune out information that does not contribute to our survival and thriving. Right. And people may not recognize this or not, but when you walk into a stadium or a movie theater or a large venue, I can almost bet that nobody in that space can name how many chairs are in the auditorium, but everybody knows where the exits are automatically, right? Like if I'm speaking in front of thousands of people and I say, raise your hand if you know how many seats are here, 0 hands go up. And if I say, raise your hand if you know where the exits are, everybody's hands go up. And that's not something we do consciously. We subconsciously are looking for information that helps us survive and thrive. Also, our brain, when we have to process very complicated information, our brain is burning calories. It actually is having to work and burn calories. And our brain knows that we may run into an emergency situation in the future, like even in an hour from now, 2 hours from now. So I need to conserve calories in my brain for those moments in case I run out of calories when a tiger is going to jump out of the woods at me, So our brain is designed to say quickly, I need to focus on information that helps me survive and thrive. And if it doesn't, I don't want to spend time thinking about it. And so I'm designed to tune out. So really, going back to, the first thing you said is our brain is naturally designed to tune out information that does not contribute to our survival and thriving. Now, in this, and that's always been true. But when it comes to specifically, say, marketing and branding right now, when people are always on their phone, always getting information, always, overwhelmed with everything that's around us at any given moment, our brain is doing that all the time. So the people who are even now communicating more clearly and more effective in communication are the people who are communicating very succinctly about how their product or service or their speech or anything helps the audience survive and thrive, and does so in a way that people can understand it so quickly that they don't have to burn any calories.
Fascinating, very fascinating. The other part of branding and communication is, well, it's a two-part question. When I started my life 4 decades ago in the corporate sector in marketing, building brands, we used to have big film stars or big sports stars. And I know that in the US, you had the same thing. What is the role these people played in communicating the brand's attributes? And today we've got influencers and micro-influencers. I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah. So what really is happening when you're associating your brand with a celebrity or somebody you already are aware of is that all of us have thoughts about that person already, right? So George Clooney, when we think of George Clooney, we often think of activist, sophistication, rich, funny, all of those things. So we already have that. Well, when a brand associates themselves with George Clooney, they don't have to teach about their brand. They just say, we are these things. So that's kind of that, when I talk about how we don't want to burn any calories with our brain, we don't want to cause too many calories to be burned, to think too hard. When a brand does that, it's basically saying, hey, don't think about it. We're as cool as George Clooney. George Clooney agreed to be our friend. You can be our friend, almost in that sense. And what they're doing in that context is, again, they're positioning themselves as the guide. So they're basically saying, we can help you win. This is how you get to be like George Clooney. When you drive our car, when you use our fragrance, when you eat our food, you get to be like George Clooney. So even though it feels when you're using celebrity like it's make all about the brand, it's actually not about the brand. In that moment, what they're doing is they're saying, you want to be like George Clooney, you want to be cool, funny, activist, we can help you. We've helped George Clooney be like this. We can help you be like this. Okay. That's really subconsciously what they're doing. Is fascinating.
And what about the influencers and micro-influencers that have now taken over the entire social media?
It's the same thing. Okay. Same thing. They have 10 million people following them. Well, there's a reason why. They want to be like them. They are entertained by them. They're forming a tribe. And then same thing, when you use those influencers to promote your brands, what you're saying is we're a part of your tribe. That's what the brands are saying. We're part of your tribe. We're going to help your tribe win. And so that it works in the exact same way.
Wonderful. My next question to you is on culture. You are living in an incredibly culturally diverse country. And all of us, communication also is, what do I hear and what do I choose to hear? I wanted to ask you, how does culture impact communication?
Pretty significantly. Actually, as you're asking that, I go back and forth a little bit. Culture impacts the nuances of communication for sure. Humor or style. Humor is very specific to each culture. So, that's one thing, that's a nuance. But the reality is, story is the universal language, right? If you go anywhere in the world and in any culture, the storytellers are the people, especially historically, are the people who really gathered a tribe and gathered a community and helped move them forward. They were the ones who were responsible for history. They were and when we say history, what we're talking about is teaching people lessons, which ultimately is about motivating them to change their actions, right? So story is the universal language. And when people tell good stories and communicate clearly through story, that doesn't change from culture to culture to me. The nuances of it do for sure. You know, how if in Germany, for instance, you have to be a little bit more succinct and clear with your messaging, because and you have to be more like detail oriented, and say from a product perspective, you have to be a little more feature oriented, talking about the details of the product. Whereas in say in Holland or in France, you can be a little bit more focused on the benefits of your product and service, because it's a little bit more of a dreamer, creative culture. And so the nuances change, but the overall idea of story and being a good, clear storyteller doesn't change through all cultures.
Wonderful. JJ, I have time for two more questions. My next question to you is that you have developed a communication framework that helps people clarify their message so their business starts to grow again. Tell me about this framework that you have created.
So what we do is we teach people how to tell story so that they can engage their customers more. And really what we use is a 7-part framework that teaches people how story works. So all stories really are the same. Like I said, they're really based in structure. And so we use that structure to teach people how to create talking points for their marketing. So the 7 elements, just very quickly, are: 1, you need to understand what your customer wants, because in a story, the hero always wants something.
Correct.
2, the story gets really good. A movie gets really good when the hero encounters a problem. So if there's no problem in a movie, there's no story.
Correct.
There's no hook. So you need to articulate what problem you solve for your customers. Then in a movie, a guide comes along that is going to help the hero win, because the hero can't do it on their own. So you position yourself as a guide. Then the guide, number 4, gives the hero a plan. There's always, you hear in the movie, what's the plan? Or here's the plan. So you need to give your customers a clear plan on how to do business with you and how to win.
Correct.
Then there's a moment the hero is called to action. There's often a ticking time bomb or something like that in a movie that forces the hero to act. So you need to call your customers to action.
Correct.
And then in the story, we know how what a happy ending looks like and what a tragic ending looks like. So you need to cast vision for your customer of what success looks like and what failure looks like.
Fantastic.
And when you do that, what you do is you invite customers into a story. It's not just telling them their story or telling your story. You're inviting them into the story where they have a problem that your product can solve, and when they purchase the product, they win. So that's what we help our customers do, as companies do, is position themselves as the guide, invite customers into a story, and ultimately sell more product and help more people overcome their problems.
Fabulous. Thank you for such a great response. And my last question to you, JJ, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your incredible journey and so much knowledge you have about communication, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
So the first thing I would say is, the first lesson is, you are the guide, not the hero of any stage you step onto. And I mean that when you're communicating as a teacher, when you're communicating as a keynote speaker, when you're communicating as a brand, on a podcast, you are not the hero of the story. You're the guide, which means you need to talk about what your customer, your audience is experiencing. So I think what happens is the first mistake in that is people walk up, say, on a stage at a conference, and they go, I'm so glad to be here. You know, I've spent 20 years studying communication theory, and I teach at Vanderbilt, and I'm and they try to like puff themselves up. Don't do that. When you walk on stage, instead go, use literally these words. You can use these to start, is say, everybody is in this room because they want blank. But the problem is blank. And if every communicator started that way, what you're going to do is you're going to hook the audience.
Absolutely.
Don't get up there and make a joke. Don't get up there and, you know, start with, you're here because you want blank.
Correct.
But the problem is blank, and then solve that problem in your talk. So that's the first thing, is don't make yourself the guide. I think the second mistake a lot of people make is they don't talk about the problem. They talk about themselves. And so when you start a speech, or you start with any kind of communication, whether again on a podcast or marketing, you need to talk about your audience's problem over and over and over again. When you do that, you hook the audience, because what you're doing is you're saying everybody is feeling this, or everybody is experiencing this, and your audience starts nodding their head and going, yes, yes. Well, what you've just done is you've hooked the audience. Now they're going to pay attention to everything else you say. And then I would say the third thing that, and this is a little bit more generic, is just don't be afraid of the nerves. Everybody is nervous when they're getting up and communicating to a large audience. Use the nerves to give you energy, and don't think like, if you're nervous, that all of a sudden that means I'm not a good communicator, I can't do this. No. I promise you, you know, presidents of countries and national leaders, I promise you, before they get in front of that mic, they're nervous. And they've done it 100 times. And I've done it. I speak every single day, and I'm telling you, there is not a day I'm not nervous. But don't be afraid of the nerves. Use the nerves. Use that energy to step into the moment versus hiding from it.
Wow, what an amazing conversation. On that note, JJ, and your 3 wonderful lessons: you are the guide, not the hero. Talk about the problem and not yourself, of course. And don't be afraid of nerves. Use your nerves to give you the energy. What an amazing 101 on public speaking. Thank you also. Thank you for talking to me about your journey, about communication. Thank you also for speaking to me about your 7-step communication framework. Finally, thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.